Welcome to DCF Investigations. Imagine looking out the window of an airplane at 35,000 feet. Below you is a blanket of clouds, illuminated only by the faint glow of the moon, or perhaps the pitch-black void of the open ocean. You are suspended in a pressurized metal tube, traveling at nearly 600 miles per hour, trusting implicitly in the laws of physics, the competence of the pilots, and the reliability of the machine. It is a trust we all place millions of times a day across the globe. We take off, we fly, and we land. It is routine, it is mundane, until it isn't. On March 8, 2014, the world was reminded that despite our satellites, our radar, and our constant connectivity, the Earth remains a vast, mysterious, and sometimes terrifying place. We are about to embark on a deep dive into the most confounding aviation mystery of the modern era. This is not just a story of a missing plane. It is a labyrinth of technical data, human fallibility, geopolitical tension, and the haunting silence of the southern Indian Ocean. This is the exhaustive story of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. To truly understand the magnitude of this event, we must first transport ourselves back to that humid Saturday morning in Kuala Lumpur. The year was 2014. It was a time when smartphones were ubiquitous, social media was fully integrated into our lives, and the idea that a massive commercial airliner could simply vanish from the face of the Earth seemed technologically impossible. The atmosphere at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, or KLIA, was business as usual. The terminal was a hive of activity, not filled with the murmur of travelers, the chime of announcements, and the squeak of luggage wheels on polished floors. Among the dozens of flights scheduled for departure was Flight MH370, a red-eye service bound for Beijing Capital International Airport. The aircraft waiting at the gate was a Boeing 777-200ER, registered as 9M-MRO. This is a crucial detail. The Boeing 777 was, and remains, one of the safest and most automated aircraft ever built. It is a marvel of engineering, equipped with redundant systems for every critical function. It does not simply fall out of the sky. This specific plane had a clean maintenance record. It had flown nearly 54,000 hours and completed over 7,500 cycles. It was a workhorse, a machine designed to cross oceans and continents without faltering. On board that night were 239 souls, 227 passengers, and 12 crew members. To tell this story properly, we must remember that these were not just numbers on a manifest. They were people with complex lives, dreams, and destinations. The passenger list was a tapestry of nations, with citizens from 14 different countries. The majority, 153 people, were Chinese citizens. Among them was a celebrated group of 19 artists and calligraphers returning from an exhibition in Kuala Lumpur. There were families returning from vacation, construction workers, and engineers. There was a stuntman who had worked on major films. There were 2 young Iranians traveling on stolen passports, seeking asylum and a new life in Europe, a detail that would later ignite a firestorm of speculation. There was an executive from IBM, a father of 2 from New Zealand, and a couple from Canada. Each person boarded that plane with the expectation of arriving in Beijing 6 hours later. In the cockpit sat 2 men who would become the focus of the most intense scrutiny in aviation history. The pilot in command was Captain Zaharieh Ahmad Shah, 53 years old, Zaharia was a veteran aviator with over 18,000 flight hours. He was a senior captain, highly respected by his peers and known for his technical prowess. He was an aviation enthusiast to his core, so much so that he had built a sophisticated flight simulator in his own home to fly virtual routes on his days off. Beside him was First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid. At 27 years old, Farik was transitioning to the Boeing 777 fleet. He had 2,700 hours of flight time. He was young, ambitious, and planning to marry his fiancée, who was also a pilot for another airline. This was Farik's final training flight. He was under the supervision of Captain Zahari, and upon landing in Beijing, he would have been fully certified on the 777. The flight preparation was routine. The fuel load was calculated to be 49,100 kilograms, enough to reach Beijing with ample reserves to reach an alternate airport if necessary. The weather was favorable. At 12:41 a.m. local time, flight MH370 took off from runway 32 right at Kuala Lumpur. The Rolls-Royce Trent 800 engines roared to life, lifting the heavy aircraft into the dark Malaysian sky. It climbed steadily, banking towards the South China Sea. For the first 38 minutes, the flight was perfectly normal. The aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The pilots communicated with air traffic control, navigating the standard departure route. The ACARS system, which stands for Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, sent routine bursts of data regarding the engine health and aircraft status to the airline's operations center. Everything was green. Everything was safe. At 1:19 a.m., the aircraft was approaching the boundary between Malaysian airspace and Vietnamese airspace. This is a critical transition point known as the Igari waypoint. Malaysian Air Traffic Control radioed the plane, instructing them to contact Ho Chi Minh City Control. The voice from the cockpit, believed to be that of Captain Zahari, replied with a calm, standard sign-off. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Those were the last words ever heard from the flight. What happened in the next few minutes is the turning point where normalcy ended and the mystery began. At 1:21 a.m., exactly 2 minutes after that final voice transmission, the aircraft's transponder stopped transmitting. The transponder is the device that talks to secondary radar on the ground, sending the plane's identity, altitude, and speed. When it went dark, MH370 effectively disappeared from the screens of air traffic controllers in Kuala Lumpur and Ho Chi Minh City. To the controllers, the blip simply vanished. In a modern aviation environment, if a transponder fails, the pilots would immediately issue a distress call or attempt to reset the system. There was no distress call. There was no communication. There was only silence. However, while the secondary radar lost the plane, military primary radar did not. Primary radar works by bouncing radio waves off metal objects. It does not require the cooperation of the aircraft. Malaysian military radar data, which was reviewed days later, painted a baffling picture. Immediately after passing the Igari waypoint and disappearing from civilian radar, the aircraft made a sharp, aggressive turn to the left. This was not a gentle drift. It was a maneuver that required manual input or a reprogramming of the flight computer. The plane turned almost 180 degrees, flying back towards the Malay Peninsula. This new flight path was erratic but purposeful. The aircraft flew back across Malaysia, navigating between the borders of Thailand and Malaysia. This is a detail that suggests a high level of sophistication. By hugging the border, the aircraft was flying in a zone where military controllers on both sides might assume the blip belonged to the other country, thereby avoiding interception. The plane crossed the peninsula and exited over the Strait of Malacca, passing the island of Penang. The first officer, Farik, had studied in Penang. The plane then turned northwest, flying up the strait towards the Andaman Sea. At 2:22 a.m., the aircraft reached the limit of the military radar's range. It was 200 nautical miles northwest of Penang. It was alive. It was flying. And then, it disappeared from radar completely. For the families waiting in Beijing, the nightmare was just beginning. The arrival board showed delayed, then simply blank. Confusion reigned. Malaysia Airlines attempted to locate the plane, but it was nowhere to be found. By dawn, search and rescue operations began in the South China Sea, the location where civilian radar had lost contact. Dozens of ships and aircraft from multiple nations scoured the water. They were looking for debris, for oil slicks, for survivors. But they were looking in the wrong ocean. It would take days for the story of the military radar to come to light, and even longer for the most critical piece of evidence to be analyzed. This evidence came from a source no one expected. A satellite network owned by a British company called Inmarsat. Although the transponder and the ACARS data transmission system had been disabled, the satellite data unit on the aircraft remained powered on. It was in a standby mode. In this mode, the system automatically sends a handshake or a ping to the satellite once every hour to confirm it is still active. It is similar to a cell phone checking for a signal from a tower. These pings contain no GPS data, no altitude, and no speed. They are simply a confirmation of connectivity. Inmarsat engineers began a forensic analysis of these pings that was unprecedented in the history of aviation. They looked at two variables: the burst timing offset, or BTO, and the burst frequency offset, or BFO. The BTO measures how long it takes for the signal to travel from the plane to the satellite and back to the ground station. Because the speed of light is constant, this time delay allows engineers to calculate the distance of the plane from the satellite. This distance creates a circle on the globe. We knew the plane was somewhere on one of these rings. The BFO measures the Doppler shift of the signal. Just as the sound of a siren changes pitch as an ambulance passes you, the frequency of the radio signal changes depending on whether the aircraft is moving towards or away from the satellite. By analyzing this shift, engineers determined that the aircraft had turned south after disappearing from military radar. The data indicated that MH370 flew for 6 more hours after the transponder was turned off. It flew south, deep into the darkness of the Indian Ocean, far from any landmass, far from shipping lanes, and far from hope. The final handshake occurred at 8:19 a.m. 8 seconds later, the aircraft sent a final, incomplete log-on request, believed to be the result of the engines flaming out due to fuel exhaustion and the auxiliary power unit kicking in. Based on this data, the plane crashed somewhere along what is known as the 7th Arc, a geometric line stretching across the southern Indian Ocean. The search area shifted dramatically, from the warm, shallow waters of the South China Sea to the remote, tempestuous, and incredibly deep waters of the southern Indian Ocean. This is one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The waves in the roaring 40s can exceed 50 feet. The ocean floor is a jagged landscape of underwater volcanoes, deep trenches, and vast abyssal plains, much of which had never been mapped before. For years, a coalition led by Australia, Malaysia, and China scoured the seabed, and they used sonar to map over 120,000 square kilometers of the ocean floor. They found shipwrecks from the 19th century that no one knew existed. They found sea mountains, but they did not find the main fuselage of MH370. However, the ocean eventually began to give up its secrets. In July 2015, more than a year after the disappearance, a piece of debris washed ashore on the French island of Réunion, thousands of miles away from the suspected crash site. It was a Flaperon, a part of the wing used to control the roll of the aircraft. Serial numbers confirmed it belonged to 9M-MRO. The discovery of the Flaperon was a breakthrough, but it was also a source of agony. It confirmed the plane was destroyed, but it did not tell us where. Barnacles attached to the Flaperon were analyzed to determine how long it had been in the water and the temperature of the seas it had drifted through. Over the next few years, more debris turned up on the coasts of Mozambique, Tanzania, Madagascar, and South Africa. Pieces of the engine cowling, the horizontal stabilizer, and interior cabin fragments were found by locals and independent researchers. Drift modeling performed by oceanographers confirmed that these locations were consistent with a crash site along the Seventh Arc, as the ocean currents move counterclockwise in that region. But despite the debris, the main wreckage remains missing, and in the absence of the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, and the flight data recorder, we are left with theories. We must now explore every plausible scenario, examining the evidence and the counter-evidence for each. The first and most controversial theory centers on the pilot, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah. This is the rogue pilot theory. Proponents suggest that Zahari hijacked his own plane to commit a complex form of murder-suicide. The flight path, specifically the turn back across Malaysia and the navigation along the border, suggests a pilot who knew exactly how to avoid detection. Furthermore, forensic analysis of Zahari's home flight simulator revealed data points from a simulation created weeks before the flight. In this simulation, a similar aircraft was flown north of Indonesia and then turned south into the Indian Ocean, ending in fuel exhaustion. Supporters of this theory argue that the depressurization of the cabin could have been used to incapacitate the passengers and crew, part by ascending to 40,000 feet, as some military radar data hinted, and turning off the pressurization system. The pilot could render everyone unconscious within minutes due to hypoxia or oxygen starvation. The pilot would have access to a long-duration oxygen mask, allowing him to fly the ghost plane until the fuel ran out. However, we must be careful not to convict a man without definitive proof. Zahari's family and friends staunchly defend him. They describe a man who was jovial, kind, and passionate about life. There were no signs of financial trouble, no known mental health issues, and no suicide note. The simulator data, while damning in appearance, was merely a collection of waypoints, not a continuous flight recording. Is it possible he was simply testing the limits of the simulation software? The second major theory focuses on a catastrophic mechanical failure. Could a fire have broken out? The cargo manifest included 221 kilograms of lithium-ion batteries and several tons of fresh mangosteens. While this combination sounds innocuous, there has been speculation that the batteries could have ignited. A fire in the electronics bay could explain the sudden loss of communications. The transponder and ACARS could have been severed by heat or disconnected by the pilots to isolate a short circuit. In this scenario, the pilots might have turned the plane back towards Malaysia in a desperate attempt to land at the nearest airport, perhaps Penang or Langkawi. But if the fire consumed the oxygen or released toxic fumes, the crew could have been overcome before they could land. The plane, left on autopilot, would then continue flying on its last programmed heading, south, until the fuel ran out. This is known as the zombie flight scenario, similar to what happened to Helios Airways Flight 522 in 2005. The flaw in the mechanical failure theory is the subsequent flight path. A plane on fire does not typically fly for 6 hours. Furthermore, the turnback was sharp and deliberate, and the flight along the Thai-Malaysian border was complex. Would a pilot fighting a raging fire navigate so precisely to avoid radar detection? And why no distress call? Then there are the hijack theories. We mentioned the 2 Iranians traveling on stolen passports. Interpol and intelligence agencies investigated them thoroughly. They were determined to be young men seeking a better life, with no ties to terrorist organizations. But could someone else have gained access to the cockpit? The cockpit door on a 777 is fortified and designed to resist intrusion. However, if a hijacker coerced a pilot to open the door, or if the door was opened for a meal service, it is theoretically possible. A remote hijacking theory also exists. Some speculate that the aircraft's computer systems were hacked, either from within the plane's electronics bay or remotely from the ground. Boeing has patented technology for the remote control of aircraft in the event of a hijacking. But there is no evidence this system was installed or active on MH370, nor that it could be accessed by a hostile actor. This theory delves into the realm of cyber warfare and industrial espionage, but remains purely speculative without hard evidence. We must also address the more extreme theories, if only to understand the depth of the public's confusion and distrust. There are theories involving a shoot-down during a military exercise that went wrong, with a subsequent cover-up. This draws parallels to the tragedy of MH370, another Malaysia Airlines 777 shot down over Ukraine just months later. However, there is no radar evidence of a missile launch or other aircraft in the vicinity of MH370. There are theories suggesting the plane landed secretly on a remote island, such as the U.S. military base at Diego Garcia. This theory has been persistent on the internet. However, the flight path indicated by the Inmarsat data steers the plane well away from Diego Garcia. Furthermore, the base is one of the most monitored places on Earth. A commercial airliner landing there unnoticed is a logistical impossibility. And of course, there are the Russian theories, suggesting Russian operatives hijacked the plane to distract from the annexation of Crimea, or to steal technology/persons on board. Again, while geopolitically intriguing, there is zero physical evidence to support this. So, where do we stand today? The official search for MH370 was suspended in January 2017. A private company, Ocean Infinity, launched a no-cure, no-fee search in 2018, using a fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles to scan the seabed with unprecedented resolution. They covered over 112,000 square kilometers. They found nothing. But the investigation is not dead. It is merely dormant, waiting for a spark. Independent researchers, scientists, and amateur sleuths continue to analyze the data. New proposals are being put forward to search new areas. Some researchers believe the plane may be further north along the seventh arc than previously thought, based on refined drift modeling of the debris. Others are looking at WSPR technology, weak signal propagation reporter, which uses amateur radio signals to track disturbances in the ionosphere caused by aircraft. If historical WSPR data can be correlated with the flight path, it might pinpoint the crash site. The legacy of MH370 is profound. It changed the way we track aircraft. The International Civil Aviation Organization has implemented new standards, requiring aircraft to report their position every 15 minutes and once every minute in distress conditions. The technology to stream black box data in real time is being developed and implemented. The world vowed that a plane full of people should never again simply vanish. Yet, for the families of the 239 souls, these technological advancements offer little comfort. They are left in a state of ambiguous loss, a psychological torture where the lack of a body or a grave prevents closure. They have formed an organization, Voice 370, to keep the pressure on governments to resume the search. They want answers. They want to know why their loved ones never came home. As we look back at the events of March 8th, 2014, we are left with a haunting reality. Somewhere in the dark, cold depths of the southern Indian Ocean lies the fuselage of a Boeing 777. Inside it are the answers to the greatest mystery of the 21st century. Until it is found, we are left with only data, debris, and the enduring silence. This case forces us to confront the limits of our control. We build machines to conquer the skies. We launch satellites to watch the world. But the ocean remains vast and indifferent. The disappearance of MH370 is a story of human tragedy, technical complexity, and the relentless pursuit of truth. It is a puzzle with missing pieces, a narrative with no ending. We at DCF Investigations will continue to monitor any new developments. If the search resumes, if a whistleblower steps forward, or if the ocean finally yields its prize, we will be here to analyze it. Now, I turn this over to you. Considering the satellite handshakes, the military radar data, and the debris found in Africa, what is your conclusion? Do you believe this was a deliberate act by someone in the cockpit, a catastrophic mechanical failure, or something else entirely? And crucially, do you believe the governments involved know more than they are sharing? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. This is DCF Investigations. Stay curious, stay observant, and never stop asking questions.